Hey, I'm Will Parker Anderson, the host of the Writer Circle podcast, which you're about to watch. It's a huge help to us if you would just like this video and subscribe to our channel because we want you to be a part of our writing community. Enjoy the show. Well, Curtis, thank you for joining us on the show. Right now we're talking to each other on computers, but we're probably sitting just a few miles from each other because we both live in Orange County, California. Someday we'll do an in-studio conversation. I think the first time that you reached out to me, you said something like, it's rare to have a colleague so close by, and that's really true. And so it's been a pleasure getting to know you and your family and grabbing lunch together from time to time. And it's hard to encapsulate the impact you and the whole Yates and Yates team have had on Christian publishing. So if you're listening to this, get ready, take notes. The masterclass begins now. Curtis, welcome to the Writer Circle.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you just asked me if we were doing rapid fire round today, and I said, absolutely, we're doing it, and can't wait to hear your answers. So are you ready?
I'm ready. I will confess that I'm usually like a person who processes things, and my wife hates how long it takes me to make decisions, so I'll see how fast I can go. We'll do our best here.
This is great. Okay, yeah, go as fast or slow as you want, honestly. So the first one is easy, paperback or hardcover?
Hardcover.
I'm with you. Sports team you most faithfully follow?
Our Angels right here in Orange County.
Nice. I wasn't sure which sport you were going to go with. Do you prefer to work from home or the office?
Right here at the office. During COVID, I was home for all of maybe like 2 weeks, and I was going crazy trying to work at home, so I was back here in the office very early on in COVID, and for a long time I was the only one here. But yeah, I do not want to be a person who works from home.
I like it.
My house is 1 mile from here, by the way, so.
Hey, your commute's not bad.
Not
That's
a bad
nice.
commute at all.
Yeah, mine is 20 steps, so. Technically I'm at home, but I'm in my garage. So what's one song you hope you never hear again?
Oh my goodness. That like bop song from when I was in college.
Oh, Hanson?
Maybe?
Yeah, good call.
No idea why that first came to mind. I can't believe that you know that song.
Yeah, I think I was in second grade. I don't even know. Fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
Okay. Best restaurant.
I can count the novels I've read on like 1 or 2 hands, probably.
Oh, nice, nice. Well, that makes sense given your line of work. Best restaurant in Orange, and I am limiting it to this city. Yeah, so we could say Orange County, but Orange is a local city here. What would you say?
Yeah, one of my favorite. I think we might have been there together. Gabby's Mexican Kitchen.
I was hoping you would say that. It is the absolute best. It's incredible. What is your strangest talent or ability?
Oh my goodness. I was not prepared for that one. My strangest talent or ability. Gosh, I don't know. I know that my wife thinks that my memory is like off the charts, and she thinks that I remember. And well, my wife and my family that I work with here, all if I say it happened, they're like, okay, never mind. I back down. If you said it happened, then it happened. So yeah, they all bank on it.
You could have some fun with that.
Right.
Just inventing scenarios, and they would believe you.
I
Okay.
can neither confirm nor deny that I may have used it that way before.
Absolutely. I wish I had that ability. If your life was a book, what would the title be? This is our last question in the rapid fire round.
Along for the ride.
Nice. Nice. That was a quick answer, too.
Well, the only reason is because I gave it a tiny bit of thought because I heard you ask that question before on one of these.
Yeah, along for the ride. There it is. Well, Curtis, I think one place we could start would just be where a lot of listeners are right now, and they're wondering whether or not to find or look for a literary agent. And I'd be curious, what advice would you give? Is there a wrong time to seek an agent? And if so, how do you know when the right time is? What would be some thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it maybe starts with the question of whether or not you should.
Mm,
And in today's publishing landscape, it's, as you know, it's exceedingly difficult to get published if you don't have an agent.
right.
And so, yeah, so, and it's not just a matter of, somebody who can open the doors for you, but having somebody who to guide you through the process, somebody who will be your advocate through the process.
Mm,
So Seeley, my dad, who I work with, often will say, like, I don't think that everybody needs to have an agent.
mm,
Um, but I might disagree with him on that. I think that I do think that well, the issue really is what your objectives are, and if you want to
yeah.
get commercially, traditionally published, it's going to be a really big uphill slog if you don't have an agent. So to your question about when's the right time, uh, as agents, what we're looking for is what you as an editor is looking for, because as soon as we sign somebody, we got to turn around and present them to you. And so if you as the author don't have what you, the editor, is looking for yet, then it's going to be tough for you to persuade us that you're ready for us to present you to an editor. And it's not that we're always going to just immediately turn around. We have plenty of authors. You and I are emailing about one right now where we are taking a very intentional period of time with an author to help them develop their platform and help them develop their content, their idea before we present it to you. And so I would just say that it would be important for you as an author, as a writer, to have clarity around what you want to do, and in particular, what you want to write. You may not have to have it fully developed yet, but if you can't, one of the things we talk about is if you haven't put it in writing yet, then it's going to be hard for us to take you seriously as a writer. If you're a writer and you can't put your ideas in writing, that's going to be hard for us to take you seriously, that this is something that you're committed to and that you're willing to
Yeah.
do the hard work of. So you need to have clarity about what your objectives are, what you want to write, and have put a lot of it in writing. Not write a book, but you've got to, may not have a full proposal yet, but it needs to be pretty well developed.
Yeah. No, it's helpful. In fact, one of our editors at Waterbrook was speaking with an author this week, and the author didn't include sample writing for their proposal. And they basically said, well, don't my previous books count?
Oh.
We're like, no, we gotta see something for this project. So to your point, yeah, no, that's really helpful. So I was looking at your mission statement. I think it's your mission statement. It's under the About page on your site.
Yeah.
And it's honestly like a primer in publishing wisdom. And so I'm going to read part of it, and then maybe we can hone in on specific aspects that will help listeners. So here's what it says on your site. It says that we help our clients focus their efforts, hone and sharpen their message, receive brand distribution, increase their influence, and build a lasting and successful career. In short, we help our clients make their ideas matter. And there's so much in there, obviously. Let's start with your goal to help authors hone and sharpen their message. Because you're not just a lawyer or just a literary agent. You are a coach, and you work a lot with writers behind the scenes to help them develop their ideas. This is a passion of mine also, and I see a lot of writers struggling to clarify their concept to the level it needs to be in order to gain publisher attention. And as you and I both know, there's so many proposals that are almost there, but not quite. So Curtis, I'd love if you could maybe walk us through some basics, that perhaps some steps that you would take with an author to help them refine their book concept, or even how to think about forming a book concept.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I mean, one of the things that we think about is, again, this idea of how is this going to be received by editors?
Yeah.
And ultimately, how is it going to be received by an audience? And so one of the things, and I think I may have heard you talk about this on a previous episode, but one of the first things is this question of who is your audience?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have crystal clarity about who you're writing to, and we actually recommend authors create an avatar and get as specific as they can about who that person is, and really you're writing to that one person, and getting laser focused on how am I going to, because one of the things we talk about with writers and authors all the time is that if you have that clarity about who you're speaking to, it impacts so many decisions you make along the way about how you're communicating,
Yeah.
what stories you're telling, what phrasing you're using, what metaphors you might use. All of that is impacted by who is that one person that you're writing to. And so that's a huge step, is defining your audience and getting as clear as you can about that. And then, in our world, which is largely prescriptive nonfiction, a huge additional point for an author to figure out going in is, what's the transformation I'm trying to create, right? What's the journey I want to take the author on? What's the problem that they're facing, and how am I going to help them address that? And what's that transformation journey? And if you understand who it is and where they're at today and where you're trying to take them, that's going to answer a lot of different questions that are going to come up for you as you're creating a book proposal and as you're actually writing a manuscript.
Yeah.
Another one that comes to mind too is just the issue of of outlining. I remember thinking back on the first time I was ever asked to create an outline. I think it was first grade, and I had to write a report in first grade, and part of what we had to turn in was an outline, and I actually wrote the report first and then sat down with my dad like, now how do I do an outline? And it was sort of trying to reverse engineer an outline.
Nice.
And I think that sometimes authors fall into that trap, right? They just kind of sit and wanted to let the fingers flow, if you will, let the words flow out of their fingers onto the screen. And I think that mapping out your ideas and your content, your argument, and figuring it out on the front end can help prevent some issues and problems on the back end of, wait, what are you trying to say here? Or do you realize what kind of a leap you made? So you and I both, I mean, I do it because I know you're going to do it. When I'm reading, I learned this from a really great publisher who's no longer with us, but when he was an editor, he one time told my author in front of me, like, as I'm reading and as I'm editing, I'm standing in proxy for your reader. I'm trying to advocate to you on their behalf so that this ultimate reading experience is the best for me, the reader. And that's a hard thing to do as an author, as a writer, to do that for yourself. Yeah. And so I think it's also important to remember that like you have blind spots as an author, as a writer, and you need to bring other people into the process. So you need the objectivity of, a spouse is great, but a spouse can sometimes, I have one client whose spouse is phenomenal at providing what she calls feedback. She'll ask the author, do you want feedback or do you want compliments?
What a question, right?
Right? And in a marital relationship, that's important to clarify, because sometimes we're just looking for a cheerleader. But what we need is somebody who's going to be iron sharpening iron. And if you brace yourself for that and truly ask for that, and maybe your spouse is good at that, but maybe it's somebody else who can be even more objective than your spouse. But you need that objective input from somebody. Yeah,
that's great. So ask your spouse for feedback. Not only will it sharpen your concept, it'll test your marriage. And you get
next level.
A different kind of feedback there. I know my wife's one of my favorite people to ask for feedback on whether sermons or writing or anything, because she just comes with a different perspective. Man, I wish people would heed your advice, Curtis, and create solid outlines. Selfishly, as an editor, then I wouldn't have to be gathering these scraps and trying to weave them into a tapestry later, because that's really the writer's job. But that's also my job, too. The other thing I was thinking is editors sometimes have the reputation of being just word slashers, and they're coming in critically. However, just as much as we're advocating for future readers, we're also advocating for the writer, because we want that author's thoughts to shine through. And so we do talk a lot about feedback on the show, trying to almost rebrand it as not just important and efficient and useful, but as really in service of writers. So I appreciate that you brought that up. Another line in your mission statement says, that Yates and Yates, and of course, a lot of agents would share this with you all, is that you help writers increase their influence. And we were emailing a bit before recording today, and you said something insightful. You said, once upon a time, authors only had to be writers, but today, authors have to be marketers, publicists, social media mavens, videographers, connectors, public speakers, and branders. It's overwhelming to a lot of people. So maybe let's just slow down and consider when did that shift and why? Would love your perspective on that.
Yeah. So as somebody who's been at this for, I think it's like 25 years now, I've seen obviously a lot of changes, a lot of shifts over the years, and I don't know that there's any that's as significant as this, particularly
Wow.
from the author's perspective. And so when I first got started, we had clients like John Eldridge, who we still work with, who was able to get discovered just by a really great manuscript. And he and his co-author at the time, Brent Curtis, wrote a book that became a book called The Sacred Romance that was
Yeah.
a really brilliant book. And one of the things, I was just with him a couple weeks ago, and one of the most amazing things is he wrote that book at age 35, co-wrote that book at age 35, and he's written, I should know how many. I've got them all right here in a shelf under my desk here. All the other books he's written, like the seed or the kernel of every one of his books since then, could be found in that first book, The Sacred Romance.
Wow.
It's mind blowing to me. But
Yeah.
point is, today, John Eldridge and Brent Curtis might not ever get discovered, might not ever get published, because they had no platform. They were two no-name Christian counselors in Colorado Springs. And they were able, because of the way the system worked back then, they were able to get discovered because they had really phenomenal content and they were really good writers. And basically, about the time so turn the clock back to, like, I think it was 2007. I had one client I'd been working with for about 3 years at that point, and another client that I was just starting to work with, and they both were itinerant preachers. And they each were in front of like 100,000 people a year. They're on the road like 40 plus weeks a year,
Wow.
traveling and doing conferences, their own conferences, guest pulpit filling kind of stuff, whatever. They're all over the place speaking in high demand. But at the end of any given year, they didn't have any real thing to show for in terms of an audience and a lever to pull when their next book came out, except the fact that the phone kept ringing and people kept calling to ask them to speak because they developed such a reputation. And so I was asking each of those guys, and on behalf of those guys, like, how do we help you build a following that gives you something to be able to, I mean, these people, when you guest speak at a church, usually you've got a sermon that you've kind of honed and preached a few times and dialed in. You know it's going to be a home run. And so those people have a pretty powerful encounter with you on that particular Sunday, and they're going to remember your name, at least for a while.
Yeah.
But if that's all it is, and you're counting and banking on the fact that when you have a book that comes out, that you're going to hope a year or 2 or 3 later that they remember your name when they come across it somewhere in some kind of ad or book promotion,
Yeah.
that's what we call hope, which isn't a strategy. And so the question at the time was, how can we help these guys build a relationship with these people? And so I remember asking the publisher for one of the authors about it, and he was like, well, it could be as simple as passing a clipboard and getting people's email addresses. And I was like, okay, what would be the next more complicated solution to this?
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work, to pass the clipboard around an audience of 500 people or 1,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this was 2007, and I think that was basically like 07, 08 was when Facebook came online. It also in 08 was basically when the Great Recession hit. And I remember, I mean, it was like a daily thing, reading the news and finding out which publishing company was executing which financial lever to try to stay afloat. And it was hiring freezes, salary freezes, layoffs, eliminating marketing budgets, or at least slashing them back big time, cutting back the number of books they were publishing, cutting back how much they would pay for advances on projects. Every single financial lever they had was getting pulled, and every day it was like a story about a different company pulling one or more of those levers. And so at that moment, as marketing budgets are getting eliminated for everybody except for the biggest projects, the publishers are turning to the authors and saying, "Hey, there's this new thing called Facebook that you can go get on, and you can basically connect directly with your readers, and it's free. And we'd love for you to go over there and do that." And it became very convenient for the publishers to sort of like offload the marketing responsibility
Sure.
to the authors. And of course, you've seen what's happened since then with all the other, what I now call the tools of the internet that have allowed authors to connect directly with their fans and their readers and build a relationship with them. So you already could do an email list back then, but what we use today, the tools we use today for that kind of stuff, didn't exist at the scale that they do now. But yeah, there really wasn't. I mean, people were blogging by then already,
Sure.
but podcasting wasn't really a thing.
Yeah.
And the kind of email subscriber list that people have today didn't really exist back then. And so there are now all these different ways and tools for authors to be able to build an audience, build a following, and most importantly, build relationship with those people so that they trust them. And you and I both are looking for authors who have an audience who knows who they are, cares about them, cares what they have to say, is listening to them on an ongoing basis, and hopefully wants to buy a book from them when they finally have one.
Yeah.
And that becomes hugely important for the publishing enterprise. And so what happened, as you just alluded to in reading that sentence I had written to you, is that it morphed over time from writers were authors. Authors were only writers.
Mm-hmm.
They were good with ideas and putting it into the written form and turning in a manuscript. And as one of our authors famously once said to his publisher, "My job is to write the books. Your job is to market and sell them."
Right.
And this is an author who, by the time this shift took place, had already been publishing for several decades at that point, and was an old dog who was not interested in learning any new tricks.
Yeah.
And yet, authors now have had to learn how to wear all those different hats, play all those different roles, and even the big ones, right? And maybe a lot of them, the way they got to be big ones was by being really good at some or more of those roles, because the ability to come to the table with an audience in hand has become more and more valuable almost every year. And there's reasons for that. So the Great Recession hit and happened, and part of what's happened in the intervening years is we've lost every major book chain except for one.
Yeah.
Right? There are no more brick and mortar stores to speak of. That's a hyperbole, but we have literally thousands fewer bookstores. So John Eldred is a great example. In his early years, when he had no public platform, when Wild at Heart came out and started to take off, about halfway through that first year, his publishing team got together and said, "Let's sell 1 million copies of this book," which that's a pretty brave undertaking. Like,
it's audacious.
Audacious. There are not very many books that sell 1 million copies. Well, when they did that, it wasn't like, "Okay, John, we want you to do this on your YouTube channel. We want you to do this on your Instagram every day," or whatever. Like, none of that existed. But what they could do was they could go to Family Christian stores and say, "Hey, how about if you develop a new thing called a Book of the Year program, and you make Wild at Heart your Book of the Year?" And all of a sudden, that book is like plastered everywhere at Family Christian stores for a whole year. And people went to Family Christian stores all the time. And so it was like a billboard for Wild at Heart every time they walked in.
Yeah.
And all the bookstore chains had mailing lists and catalogs. And so what do you know? Wild at Heart's on end caps in every store, and it's getting into people's mailboxes in these flyers and catalogs. And they could essentially like pull all these big levers that don't exist anymore to make a bestseller.
Yeah.
And of course, the book already had some momentum going, which is why they decided to do it. But the point is that all those levers that they used to pull don't exist anymore.
Are gone now. Yeah.
And now therefore they have to rely on, because people's attention is so fractured and fragmented, and mass media is not how you reach people anymore. You have to reach people in their niche media tastes, right? There are millions of viewing options. We used to have 3 TV channels when I was a kid, right? Like, um, if you could get on one of those TV channels, or early in my career, if you could be in the New York Times review of books, like, you were going to get seen by all the right people.
Mm,
But that doesn't exist anymore. And so
right.
that's why there's so much of a weight that's been transferred from publisher to author in terms of this issue of platform.
Mm. That's really insightful. I don't know that I'd ever connected the shift. I thought mostly of when some of those social media sites emerged, or apps, but to connect it to the recession, I think is really interesting. You're bringing me back with the family Christian stores. I grew up going to those. Do you remember the headphone booth where you could put on headphones and preview albums? That was
I
amazing.
don't, because I used to go to a store called the Pink Lady over where, not too far from where you are,
Uh-huh.
at Tustin and Collins,
Yeah.
and it was our local Christian bookstore. One of them, actually. We had several around us. There's the only one left in Orange County is at Mariners Church.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Calvary.
back then there was no headphone station, but that's where we went to buy all of our Christian music, including
Yeah.
Christian books, and maybe an ice cream cone if mom was feeling generous that day.
Yeah, I mean the world of Spotify and streaming and sampling anything at any time is. I've often thought, what it'll be like for my kids to discover new music and how different it's going to be. I
Right.
remember, I think I was a senior in high school, and my best friend picked me up, and he's like, "It's your birthday. We're going to Best Buy, and you can buy any CD you want. I got you." And those days are just so far gone. Do you ever wish that you could turn back the clock, Curtis, and go back to a world? I know it's not possible, but where truly those who are gifted in the craft of writing, even if they didn't have a platform, had more of a chance. Do you ever wish that you could go back?
Totally, of course. Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, again, I heard you mention this in a previous episode, but anymore, the first question people want to ask is about platform. And there are too many people with big platforms who don't really have all that much to say, who are
Yeah.
getting opportunities to publish books. And we're not interested in working with those kind of people, but they end up taking up slots. Publishing
Yeah.
teams have a certain number of slots in any given year, and it's a finite number. And once you're full, you're full, unless the Pope calls, and then you're going to publish the Pope's book. But otherwise, like, there's a finite number, and so a lot of those slots are getting taken. Again, it's hard because publishing companies are in business to make money.
Yeah.
And most of you are owned at this point by big, huge, international media conglomerates.
Mhm.
And there are earnings reports to hit and all that kind of stuff. And so it's hard to fault the publisher for wanting to mitigate their risk. And that's really what the platform piece is all about, is publishers are essentially venture capitalists. They're
Mhm.
investing in these properties. And if you're in their role, if you're on Shark Tank and looking at an opportunity between 2 authors,
Yeah.
and they're writing a similar book, and one's got an audience already of 50,000 devoted fans, and the other person has 0, you're going to put your money on the guy with 50,000 fans,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's going to lower the risk factor and increase the chances that you're going to get a return on your investment. So I understand why it is the way it is now, but yeah, I wish that that people with really great things to contribute to the world had a chance to do that without having to jump through the hoops they have to today. So yeah, I do wish that we could turn back the clock. Especially, it's frustrating for both of us, when we come across somebody who we really like, they're very likable, they're very talented, they're very gifted, they have great content, and they're a really phenomenal writer. The world just hasn't discovered them yet.
Hmm.
That's frustrating, because then our answer to both of them from both of us is, this is great, but you need to go build a platform.
Hmm.
And like I said, we're doing that with several different
Yeah.
of our newest clients right now. And the flip side of it is that in an earlier era, it was still difficult to find the right connections and the right way to get your foot in the door, and especially in a pre-internet world, right? Like
Yeah.
to figure out who do I need to talk to and how do I go about this and how do I get in front of the right people to get my foot in the door to show off these great ideas and great writing that I have. And now everybody's got access to the whole world.
Hmm.
And there is something valuable for writers and authors today about the idea that anybody can put something out on the internet and introduce it to the world. And a lot of times the cream does rise to the top, like the wisdom of the crowd. Like people will find you if you're really good.
Yeah.
It just may take work, and you're going to have to put in a lot of effort, and it may not be as easy. I mean, one of our clients got discovered when he was 21 or 22 by putting out a YouTube video that was a spoken word thing that he created with a college buddy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That within a few days, within a week, I think it had like 7 million views.
Yeah.
And so that's the one end of the spectrum. That is the rare exception that like you put out your content for the world and you're a hit instantly and discovered instantly, and literally like within, I think it was maybe 2 weeks of him posting the video on YouTube, we're talking with him, got connected through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
That's the rarity, and most of us have to use the internet to get discovered, and it's going to take a lot more effort and work than that. But it's at least available to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? And there are a lot of kind of basics, if you will, in terms of what are the steps to get there and what are the tools to use that that are available to everybody. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Would you say that Jesus is greater than religion? Just kidding. little Easter egg there. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll just leave it.
The video was actually originally the video was called "Why I Hate Religion But Love Jesus." And that was a little too wordy when we got to put the content into a book, and so we shortened it to "Jesus is greater than religion." Yep.
Yeah.
You're tracking with me.
I think I was in college, at least when I saw it, and so I remember it coming through my feed. Well, to the
I'll just get one little tidbit on that story. So
Yeah.
the mutual friend is like the video had got maybe a couple million views, and I was traveling somewhere, and the mutual friend called and left a voicemail and said, "Hey, I got this guy I've been mentoring, and he put this thing up, and it's all of a sudden it's got a couple million views. Give me a call. We should talk about this." And I didn't have time to get back to him right away. And then the next time I heard from him was a few days later. He's like, "It's up to 7 million." I was like, "I'm calling you back." And then literally that Sunday after church, we were at Cafe Rio over here in Tustin, and I'm standing in line, and somebody else in line is watching that video on their phone while they're in line. And I was like, "Yeah, I think we need to pay attention here. Something's going on."
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And especially back then, I mean, 7 million views is still very significant, obviously, but
Right.
back then even more so.
Totally.
I often catch myself as I'm on YouTube or wherever. I'll look at the number of views, and it has to be in the millions for me to even watch it. What a bizarre world we live in when that's the case. It's like, oh, this only has, 300,000 views. Nah, not worth my time.
Not worth my time. Moving on.
Yeah.